Once you've got your filters sorted, you can now sort of move on to the final stages, and that's the vehicle walk around. Now, this first particular job that I'm doing here is only relevant to vehicles which have the CVT automatic transmission. My vehicle is a CVT vehicle. The CVT uses a special type of fluid. It's not standard Dextron. It's Nissan's own fully synthetic oil, and it is essential that you use that oil whenever you're topping up or replacing. You can do a visual inspection on the dipstick like this. There's two markings on the dipstick, one for cold, one for hot. Because the vehicle is cold, you can sort of see on the dipstick back there that it was actually on the cold position. You can also tell by the colour condition of the oil that's in there. This is me checking the brake pads. Because I've got the alloy wheels there, I can actually check the brake pads visually. On this particular sequence, I'm just pointing out some of the sill access points where you can actually remove these rubber bungs and fill up the sills with dinitrile or wax oil. I'm also showing here of an inspection on the underside where I've noticed on this particular box section, on this flange joint, there are a couple of spots of surface rust developing. It is best to get these areas cleaned up and reapply the relevant underseal. I always tend to use dinitrile rather than wax oil because it sort of has far better penetration than standard wax oil. Also take the opportunity to investigate the exhaust system, look out for any holes, any bends, kinks, etc. and any sort of work that you may want to sort of plan onto your future regime of work that you may sort of have. Now, what you can see here is I've actually gone under the vehicle and just touched up those sort of particular areas. In the inner arch area at the front, you want to examine things such as the road springs to make sure that they're not cracked, examine the shock absorber to make sure that there's no leakage, and what I tend to do is just sort of grab hold of it and give it a bit of a wriggle to make sure that the top mounts are in good shape. With the road wheels themselves, because this has, I believe, the case bearings, you can actually grab hold of the road wheel in a 12 to 6 position, and if you have any kind of movement, you know that you've got a wheel bearing that's on its way out, and that's just something that you can sort of get sorted out at some point. The bearings are pressed into the hubs, so you would need to take the hubs to a machine shop. A visual inspection of the front cross member here. This is a particular area that is quite rust prone on the K11. Mine, miraculously, is actually immaculate, and it has been treated to extensive dinitriling and has actually had a load of dinitrile sprayed into it to hopefully sort of keep it in the condition that it's in at the moment. I've also painted it with some satin black paint just for an extra level of protection. You can also inspect the front of the radiator and, if fitted, the air conditioning condenser. Again, moving on to the passenger side or near side of the vehicle. Again, we can investigate the road spring, we can check that shock absorber, and we can check the brake ferrules and everything else that you would like to check. Also checking the wheel bearings here for wear. Mine appear to be fine, so no problems at all. On the earlier shot, you actually saw me grabbing the wheel in the 9 to 3 position and waggling it side to side. That is just to check for sort of any wear in the track rod ends and sort of any undue noises that may be coming up. You can also investigate here the trailing link for the rear beam, and if the vehicle is jacked up, you can actually use something like a crowbar to get it in between the flange and the bush and just sort of gently test that bush for any wear within the bushes, and this is both suitable for the front and the rear. It's just something that's sort of a little point that you can sort of think about for replacing in the near future if you do have any excess wear or knocking within these bushes. It's something that they do sort of check at the MOT. Now, the Micra does have not a complicated rear end setup, but it is complicated by small car standards because it does have quite a nice multi-link location strategy for that rear beam axle. So you've got the panhard rod and you've got those two trailing links which link the the beam to the car. In this particular shot here, I'm just checking the fuel tank strap. You want to make sure that the strap itself is well located and not excessively rusty. This particular strap on the fuel tank, is absolutely fine. There's no excessive rust on the straps, and we do appear to be okay. Now, it's slightly out of focus, but what I'm trying to get to here is there is a brake compensating valve which is attached to part of the rear suspension. And what I tend to do with this is just to make sure that it still moves freely. I believe it's a load compensation device, so that if the vehicle is heavily loaded in the rear, it can sort of apply, I think it's more brake pressure to the rear of the car just to sort of keep braking balanced, which is quite useful if you do have a heavy load. Now that I'm checking the rubber section of the fuel filler hose, fuel filler neck rather, worth just checking that that is in good shape. The neck itself is largely protected by this plastic cover, but it is worth, as part of your weekly cleaning regimen, to make sure that you do keep this particular area clean and free of mud. Also check your arch lips as well for any signs of rust which are beginning to develop, so you can actually get these treated now that it's coming up into the summer. Now that we're out of the winters, you can get these areas sorted out. What I'm doing now is just again sort of checking the condition of these fuel pipes, which run underneath the car on the passenger side up into the engine bay. So you've got a fuel supply and return, and then you've got the various pipes that go to that evaporative canister. Again here, checking the heat shields underneath the exhaust. So make sure that these ones are in place, because the tank is plastic and obviously the exhaust is hot, so those heat shields are essential. So now we're getting up, or trying to. It comes to being 38, slightly overweight. Coming around to the front of the vehicle, what I'm doing here is I'm just showing the front box section, and you can actually see that there are a number of holes on there which may be for sort of accessories that this vehicle doesn't have, but I actually find them very useful for injecting dinitrile into the car. On the inner wing you have these little holes here, which are actually plug holes for the inner arch liner, but you can use them if you want to get some dinitrile or wax oil in there. This particular area is a bit of a water trap, and what I've done, certainly on the other side of the vehicle, is put some dinitrile in there just to keep it from sort of getting too rusty. Mine's absolutely fine, but it is a rust trap, so it is a water trap rather, so it is worth keeping dry, making sure that you do keep an eye on that. Coming underneath the vehicle at the rear, you can see that jacking point on the spare wheel well, but you can also see I'm grabbing hold of the panhard rod, just giving it a good shake. If there is any movement on the panhard rod at either end, then you will need to have a look at replacing those bushes. Take a look at your rear road springs and rear shock absorbers, and also take a look at the rear of the drum there to make sure that the brake pipe going into it is not excessively rusty. It's also worth looking at the rear beam, because I have seen situations where the rear beams can corrode at the point where the rear beam goes upwards to meet the rear hub, and depending on your outlook, that could be something that could write the car off. You could replace the rear beam, but if the rust has got to that particular level, then you really are in interesting territory where potentially the rest of the car is not in sort of great shape. After I took this video, I actually cleaned up this whole area and gave the rear beam a liberal coating with some satin black paint, just to make sure that it'll go on for another X number of years. It's an 18-year-old car now, and I don't intend to be getting rid of it at any point soon. It's a lovely little vehicle, and I do enjoy owning it. The area that I'm focusing on now are the door hinges, and you want to use some lithium grease just to lubricate those. Again, also lubricating up the latch mechanism there. I never put anything into the keyholes themselves, they generally advise that you shouldn't. So coming round again to the front of the vehicle, you can apply some lithium grease also to that bonnet catch. You can also do the same on the boot catch as well. So the next particular stage here is starting the vehicle up after you've done everything. What I tend to do is I start the vehicle, wait for the oil pressure light to go out, let it idle for a little bit, and then just rev it to around 2,500 RPM. The mileage on display here is not actually correct, and the more eagle-eyed among you will recognise that that is not actually a K11 coil pack dash. So, a little tip here, if you ever have a main car that you get serviced, say, at a main dealer, you do sometimes get the steering wheel cover, the seat covers and the floor covers. What I've done is I've actually kept hold of mine, and I tend to use them whenever I'm doing work on the cars, just so if I've got to move them back, I can move them back without sort of, you know, dirtying up the interior. I'd like to thank you all very much for watching. The final stage, obviously, if you wanted, is you can wash and polish the vehicle. But for this particular video, that's it for now. Again, if you would like to subscribe, don't forget to hit that like button, and also consider subscribing for more upcoming fascinating hobbies.